Everything goes to Marcus, the lawyer's voice echoed through the funeral parlor like a death sentence. The words hit Daniel like a sledgehammer to the chest. Around him, relatives shifted uncomfortably in their black suits, some exchanging knowing glances, others covering their mouths to hide smirks. The scent of lilies mixed with expensive cologne made his stomach churn as he stood frozen beside his grandfather's mahogany casket. Marcus straightened his Italian silk tie, his face a mask of false humility. I don't know what to say. The penthouse downtown, the investment portfolio, the business holdings, the lawyer continued, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. All of it belongs to you now, Mr. Marcus. Daniel's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of a chair. 34 years of being the quiet grandson, the one who listened while Marcus boasted, the one who held his tongue while his brother took credit for every family achievement. And this was his reward. What about Daniel? Aunt Helen whispered from the back row, her voice barely audible above the rain pelting the windows. The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling through papers with deliberate slowness. Daniel receives the rural property. Silence crashed down like a thunderclap. Then came the barely contained laughter, the whispered comments that cut deeper than any blade. The old farmhouse? That falling down shack? Well, at least he got something. Maybe he can finally find some peace out there, if the roof doesn't cave in first. Daniel felt every eye in the room burning into his skin. His chest tightened, but he refused to let them see him break. Not here. Not in front of them. Marcus approached, his leather shoes clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Daniel, I want you to know. Don't. Daniel's voice came out rougher than he intended. Just don't. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like applause for his humiliation. Daniel looked down at his grandfather's peaceful face one last time, searching for answers that would never come. I always wondered why Grandpa kept that old place, Marcus continued, unable to resist twisting the knife. Maybe he thought you'd appreciate the simplicity. Daniel walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing in the vast hall. Behind him, the conversation resumed, flowing around his absence like water around a stone. In the parking lot, rain soaked through his only good suit as he threw his battered suitcase into the trunk of his decade-old sedan. The funeral home's warm lights glowed behind him, full of people who would feast on his humiliation for months to come. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Keys under the flower pot. Good luck, brother. Daniel stared at the message until the words blurred. Good luck. As if luck had anything to do with a lifetime of being invisible, of being the grandson who didn't matter, the son who never quite measured up. The drive through the city felt like a funeral procession of one. Neon signs reflected off his wet windshield, each light a reminder of the life he was leaving behind. Not that it had ever really been his life to begin with. I didn't want your fortune, Grandpa, he whispered to the empty car. I just wanted to understand why I was forgotten. The words hung in the air like incense, bitter and heavy. Outside, the city gradually gave way to suburbs, then to farmland stretched thin under a weeping sky. With every mile, Daniel felt himself disappearing further from the world that had never quite known what to do with him. His phone rang. Marcus again. Daniel, listen. About what happened back there. I'm not coming back, Daniel said quietly. What? Come on, don't be dramatic. We can work something out. Maybe I can help you fix up the old place, turn it into something decent. Goodbye, Marcus. Daniel hung up and turned off his phone. The rain was letting up now, and in the distance he could see the outline of hills against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there waited the rural property, his grandfather's final message, written in disappointment and wrapped in charity. The radio crackled with static as he drove deeper into the countryside. Classical music faded in and out, like a ghost trying to speak. He thought about all the summers he'd spent at that farmhouse as a child, all the stories his grandfather had told him on the porch while Marcus played video games inside. You're different, Daniel, the old man had said once. Different isn't always easy, but it's always important. Now driving toward his inheritance of shame, Daniel wondered if his grandfather had been right about anything at all. The GPS died 20 minutes before Daniel reached his destination, leaving him to navigate by memory, down roads that seemed to remember him better than his own family had. When he finally turned onto the familiar dirt path, his foot found the brake without conscious thought. This can't be right. Where his grandfather's modest farmhouse should have stood, a magnificent estate rose from the landscape like something from a dream. Stone and glass gleamed under the clearing sky, surrounded by manicured gardens that rolled down to a private lake. Grapevines stretched in perfect rows across acres of land, and solar panels caught the last rays of dying sunlight. Daniel sat in his idling car, rain drumming on the roof, staring at what had to be someone else's property. He pulled out the address from the lawyer's packet, checked it twice, then looked back at the impossibility before him. The electronic gate stood open, as if expecting him. He drove through slowly, his old sedan looking embarrassingly out of place on the cobblestone driveway. Up close, the house was even more stunning. A perfect blend of rustic charm and modern luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the surrounding vineyards. Daniel parked and stepped out, his legs shaking. The air smelled of roses and fresh rain, nothing like the musty scent he remembered from childhood visits. A fountain gurgled softly in the center of a circular courtyard, its sound mixing with distant bird songs. "Grandpa, what the hell did you do?" His hands trembled as he approached the front door, massive oak with iron fixtures that looked both ancient and expensive. There, just like Marcus had said, a key waited under an ornate flower pot. The door swung open with a whisper, revealing an interior that took his breath away. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by exposed beams that gleamed with fresh polish. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled another. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, and original oil paintings hung in perfect lighting. "This isn't real," Daniel whispered, his voice echoing in the vast space. He wandered through room after room, each more impressive than the last. A chef's kitchen with granite countertops and professional appliances. A library that could have belonged to a university. A master bedroom with panoramic views of the vineyards. Everything was immaculate, as if someone had been maintaining it just for his arrival. In the study, Daniel found a desk made of dark walnut, its surface empty except for a single envelope, bearing his name in his grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. His hands shook as he tore it open. "My dear Daniel, if you're reading this, then the lawyers have done their job and my little theatrical performance at the funeral has gone according to plan. By now, Marcus believes he has won everything, and you believe you have lost. Both of you are wrong. The penthouse and the business holdings I left to your brother will keep him comfortable for a few years, maybe a decade if he's careful. But this, what surrounds you now, this is worth more than everything else combined. I have been building this for you since you were 12 years old. Since the day you told me you didn't want to be rich, you just wanted to be happy. Do you remember that conversation? We were sitting on the old porch, watching thunderclouds gather over the hills. You said money made people forget who they were supposed to be. I never forgot those words. This property includes 300 acres of prime vineyard land, a fully operational winery that has been producing award-winning wines under a private label for the past 15 years, investment accounts worth more than Marcus will see in his lifetime, and something else, something I could only trust to someone who understood the value of silence. Check the wine cellar, Daniel. Behind the 1947 vintage, you'll find a door. Inside that room are documents and resources that will change not just your life, but the lives of everyone in our valley. I couldn't risk putting this power in the hands of someone who values show over substance. I trusted your silence because I knew you would use it wisely. I gave Marcus the noise because that's all he ever understood. Your real inheritance begins now. Love, Grandpa Samuel. Daniel read the letter 3 times, his heart pounding harder with each word. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house around him seemed to pulse with secrets, every shadow holding possibilities he couldn't yet comprehend. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. The wine cellar waited downstairs, along with answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. As he headed for the stairs, Daniel caught his reflection in a hallway mirror. For the first time in years, he didn't see the forgotten grandson or the overlooked brother. He saw someone whose story was just beginning. "The noise of arrogance passes," he whispered, remembering his grandfather's words. "But the sound of wisdom remains." The wine cellar exceeded every expectation Daniel had managed to form in the past 24 hours. Rows upon rows of bottles stretched into the shadows, some covered in decades of dust, others gleaming with recent care. The air held the rich scent of aged oak and fermented grapes, mixed with something else, the weight of time itself. Daniel ran his fingers along the stone walls as he searched for the 1947 vintage his grandfather had mentioned. The cellar seemed to go on forever, carved deep into the hillside like a cathedral dedicated to patience and craft. He found the section marked with the year, bottles that looked more like artifacts than beverages. Behind them, just as the letter had promised, was a door so perfectly concealed that he would have walked past it a dozen times without noticing. The handle turned with surprising ease. Inside, a small room glowed with soft LED lighting, its walls lined with filing cabinets and a single desk bearing a computer that looked both modern and untouched. But it was the contents of the open filing cabinet that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. Medical records, hundreds of them. Patient files from the local hospital stretching back 15 years. Treatment plans for people Daniel recognized, farmers from the valley, shop owners from the small town he'd driven through, elderly couples who'd worked the land for generations. All of them had one thing in common: their medical bills had been paid in full by an anonymous benefactor. Daniel sank into the desk chair, his hands trembling as he flipped through file after file. Mrs. Rodriguez's cancer treatment, paid. The Jackson family's premature twins, 3 months in intensive care, completely covered. Old Pete's hip replacement, Sarah's diabetes medication, the volunteer fire department's new ambulance. Millions of dollars in quiet generosity, all flowing from accounts his grandfather had carefully managed and grown over decades. "Jesus, Grandpa," Daniel whispered. "What were you doing?" A leather-bound journal lay open on the desk, his grandfather's handwriting filling page after page with meticulous records of every donation, every life touched by his secret philanthropy. The greatest wealth is the ability to ease suffering without seeking credit. Today I paid for young Tommy's surgery. His parents will never know it wasn't insurance. That's how it should be. The Martinez farm was going under. I bought their debt from the bank and forgave it through a shell company. They think they won some lottery for struggling farmers. Let them think that. Pride intact, family saved. Daniel called today. He sounded lonely. I wish I could tell him what I'm building for him, but he needs to discover his own strength first. Soon, my boy, soon you'll understand why I kept you at arm's length while I prepared your real inheritance. Daniel's eyes blurred as he read entry after entry, documenting not just financial transactions, but the careful orchestration of hope in a community that had no idea who their guardian angel was. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Hope you're settling in okay. House looks better than I expected from the road. Maybe we can get some good money for it when you're ready to sell." Daniel stared at the message, then at the files surrounding him, then at the window that looked out over vineyards his grandfather had planted and tended, while secretly caring for an entire community. The disconnect was so profound, it made him dizzy. Another file caught his attention, thicker than the others, labeled simply "Future Plans." Inside, architectural drawings for a medical clinic, complete with equipment specifications and staffing projections. A business plan for expanding the secret philanthropy, creating a foundation that could operate in perpetuity, all of it waiting for someone trustworthy enough to carry on the work. Daniel's hands found his grandfather's journal again, flipping to the final entry, dated just 1 week before the old man's death. "I am dying and I am at peace. Daniel will find this room when he's ready. He has his mother's heart and his father's quiet strength. He won't seek glory for this work. He'll seek results. That's why it has to be him. Marcus would turn this into a monument to himself within a year. Daniel will turn it into something that lasts forever. I was never disappointed in you, my boy. I was preparing you. Every family gathering where you stayed quiet while Marcus performed, every time you chose listening over speaking, Every moment you showed me you valued substance over show. You were earning this inheritance. The money is just money, but this is your purpose." Daniel closed the journal and sat in the glowing silence of the hidden room. Around him, the evidence of decades of quiet heroism waited to be continued or abandoned. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a mantle he'd never asked for, but somehow always expected to wear. Outside, night had fallen completely, and through the cellar's small window he could see stars scattered across the clear sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere out there, families were sleeping soundly in homes they'd never lost because of his grandfather's secret interventions. Somewhere, people were alive who might have died without anonymous help. Daniel pulled out his phone and deleted Marcus's text without responding. Some conversations belonged to a different life, a smaller version of himself that no longer existed. He had work to do. Dawn arrived with a knock at the front door that echoed through the house like a judgment call. Daniel had spent the night in his grandfather's study, surrounded by financial documents and medical files, trying to comprehend the scope of the responsibility that had fallen into his lap. Through the window, he saw a woman in her 50s standing on the porch, her work-worn hands clutching a manila envelope. She looked familiar, someone from his childhood summers, though he couldn't place her name. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked as he opened the door, suddenly aware that he was still wearing yesterday's funeral clothes. "Are you Samuel's grandson, the one who inherited the property?" Her voice carried a mixture of hope and desperation that made his chest tighten. "I'm Daniel." "I'm Elena Martinez. My husband Carlos and I run the farm about 5 miles down the valley." She paused, studying his face. "You probably don't remember us, but you used to buy eggs from our stand when you were little." The memory came flooding back, a shy boy hiding behind his grandfather while the kind woman packed extra cookies into their basket. "I remember. You always gave me those sugar cookies shaped like horses." Her face softened. "You do remember. Good. That makes this easier somehow." She held out the envelope with trembling hands. "I don't know if your grandfather ever mentioned us, but we've been having some difficulties. Medical bills mostly. Carlos had a heart attack last spring, and then I got sick, and the insurance—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. Daniel took the envelope, feeling its weight like a stone in his hands. Inside, he knew he'd find exactly what he'd been reading about all night. Another story of quiet desperation that his grandfather had been secretly addressing. "The bank is foreclosing next month," Elena continued. "We owe $60,000. I know it's not your problem, and I know we barely know each other, but your grandfather, he was special. He understood this valley, understood what it meant to lose something you've built your whole life around." Daniel's mind raced. In the hidden room downstairs, he'd found accounts containing more money than he'd ever imagined. But how could he explain that to Elena without revealing the secret his grandfather had died to protect? "He helped us before," she whispered. "Somehow, someway, our medical bills got paid. Carlos thinks it was some kind of charity program, but I always wondered if your grandfather had something to do with it. He had that look in his eyes, you know, like he knew more than he was saying." The morning sun caught Elena's tears, and Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. This wasn't about money or inheritance or family drama. This was about people whose lives hung in the balance, while he stood in a mansion built from his grandfather's secret generosity. "Elena," he said slowly, "can you give me 24 hours? "Of course. I'm sorry to bother you so soon after the funeral. I just didn't know where else to turn." After she left, Daniel walked back to the wine cellar, her envelope in his hand. The hidden room seemed smaller now, more urgent. On the desk, his grandfather's computer waited, its screen dark but somehow expectant. Daniel had never considered himself a man of action. Throughout his life, he'd been the watcher, the listener, the one who stayed in the background while others took center stage. But as he powered up the computer and began navigating through his grandfather's carefully organized financial systems, he felt something awakening inside him, a sense of purpose that had been dormant for 34 years. The process was simpler than he'd expected. His grandfather had set up multiple shell companies and charitable foundations, each designed to provide help while maintaining complete anonymity. A few keystrokes, and the Martinez family's debt could disappear as mysteriously as their medical bills had. But as Daniel's finger hovered over the enter key, he realized this was about more than just helping Eleanor and Carlos. This was his first test as the inheritor of his grandfather's secret mission. One decision would define not just their future, but his own. Outside, the valley stretched endlessly under morning light, its fields and farms home to hundreds of families who had no idea their guardian angel had passed away. They were depending on someone they'd never heard of to continue protecting them from disasters they couldn't prevent. Daniel thought about Marcus, probably waking up in the penthouse downtown, planning how to spend his inheritance on things that would impress people who didn't matter. He thought about the funeral, about the whispered comments and barely hidden laughter at his expense. Then he thought about Elena's tears, about Carlos working a farm with a weak heart, about all the quiet heroes struggling to survive in a world that seemed designed to break them. Daniel pressed the enter key. Somewhere in the digital banking network, $60,000 moved silently from one of his grandfather's foundations to the bank holding the Martinez family's mortgage. By tomorrow, Eleanor would receive a call telling her that an anonymous benefactor had paid their debt in full through some obscure agricultural relief program. She would never know it was Daniel. That was the point. As he walked back upstairs, Daniel felt the weight of his inheritance settling around him like a suit tailored specifically for his shoulders. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the forgotten grandson or the overlooked brother. He was the guardian of secrets that could change the world, one quiet act of generosity at a time. The call came 3 days later, just as Daniel was beginning to understand the rhythm of his new life. Elena's voice through the phone was pure joy mixed with disbelief. "Daniel, I don't know if you believe in miracles, but one just happened to us." He was standing in the vineyard, watching workers tend the grapevines that his grandfather had planted years ago. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. "Tell me," he said, though he already knew what she would say. "The bank called. Someone paid our debt. All of it. They said it was some agricultural foundation, but they couldn't tell us who. Carlos is crying, Daniel. I haven't seen him cry since our wedding day." Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her gratitude wash over him through the phone. This was what his grandfather had felt, he realized. This moment when desperation transformed into hope, when families stayed together instead of falling apart. "I'm so happy for you, Eleanor. I keep thinking your grandfather would have been pleased. He always said this valley takes care of its own, even when we don't know how." After Elena hung up, Daniel stood among the vines for a long time, watching the workers move with practiced efficiency. They were employees of the winery, he'd learned, people who'd been quietly kept on salary even during years when production was minimal, another layer of his grandfather's secret generosity. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Sold the penthouse. Bought a yacht. You should see this thing. When are you coming back to civilization?" Daniel deleted the message without responding and walked back toward the house. In the past week, he'd begun to understand the scope of his inheritance, not just the money, which was substantial, but the network of quiet interventions his grandfather had maintained for decades. The wine business alone was worth millions, but it had been operated more as a front than a profit center. The real purpose was to justify the large cash flows needed for the anonymous donations. Every bottle sold helped fund another family's medical bills, another farm's survival, another child's education. Inside the house, Daniel found a stack of mail that had been forwarded from his grandfather's old address. Most of it was financial statements and business correspondence, but one envelope stood out, handwritten, with a return address he didn't recognize. The letter inside was from someone named Rose, a woman whose granddaughter had needed expensive surgery that insurance wouldn't cover. "I don't know who you were or how you found out about Emma's condition, but the hospital called yesterday to say her surgery was fully paid for by an anonymous donor. The doctors say she'll make a complete recovery now. I've been trying for weeks to find out who helped us so I could say thank you properly. The hospital couldn't tell me anything except that it was someone who wanted to remain private. Whoever you are, wherever you are, Please know that you didn't just save Emma's life. You saved our whole family. We'll never forget what you did for us." Daniel sat at his grandfather's desk, holding the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. Rose had written to his grandfather's old address, not knowing that her benefactor had died just days before her granddaughter's surgery. The timing meant that this had been one of the last acts of generosity the old man had arranged. That evening, Daniel called the hospital and spoke to Emma's surgeon. The little girl was recovering perfectly, and the bills were indeed fully paid. Rose's letter had been heartfelt but unnecessary. His grandfather had never sought thanks for his secret charity work, but Daniel realized that he needed to see this for himself. The next morning, he drove to the children's ward of the regional medical center. He didn't go as Daniel, inheritor of a secret fortune. He went as a man who needed to understand what his grandfather had been fighting for all these years. Emma was 7 years old, with bright eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She was showing her grandmother a drawing she'd made, a picture of angels with wings made of rainbow colors. "The nice angel paid for my operation," Emma told the nurse who was checking her vitals. "Grandma Rose says I can't see him, but I know he's there." Daniel watched from the hallway, his throat tight with emotion he hadn't expected. This little girl would grow up healthy and strong because of his grandfather's generosity. She'd probably never know her guardian angel had been a quiet old man who'd made his fortune and then spent decades giving it away to people like her. When he got back to the house that evening, Daniel found another envelope waiting for him. This one was from the lawyer who'd handled his grandfather's estate. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "Daniel, your grandfather asked me to give this to you after you'd had time to settle in. He said you'd know when you were ready for it." Attached was a bank statement for an account Daniel had never seen before. The balance made him sit down hard in his chair. $50 million. A note in his grandfather's handwriting was clipped to the statement. "This is your operating fund, my boy. Use it well. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few." Daniel stared at the numbers until they blurred together. $50 million sitting quietly in an account, waiting for him to decide how to change the world with it. Outside his window, the valley stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. Somewhere out there, families were facing crises they couldn't handle alone. Somewhere, children needed surgery their parents couldn't afford. Somewhere, farms were failing, and dreams were dying, and hope was running thin. But now there was Daniel, holding the keys to a secret kingdom built on the simple idea that wealth meant nothing unless it was used to lift up others. He thought about Marcus on his yacht, probably surrounded by people who liked him for his money. Then he thought about Emma drawing pictures of rainbow-winged angels and Elena crying with joy over a debt that had mysteriously disappeared. There was no contest. Daniel opened his grandfather's computer and began studying the files more carefully. Tomorrow, he would start learning how to be a guardian angel. Tonight, he would plan how to make sure the harvest his grandfather had started would continue growing for generations to come. The silence of the house around him felt different now, not empty but full of potential, full of secrets that were about to change everything. What do you think happened next in Daniel's journey? Did he manage to continue his grandfather's secret mission successfully? If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more compelling tales that celebrate the power of quiet heroism and the true meaning of inheritance.